Our next speaker here is Dr. Keri Merritt. And if production team, if you want to bring Dr. Merritt in, that'd be awesome. Good morning.
Morning. How are you?
I am good. I'm one of the a former faculty member at the University of Washington, one of the staff members here at Common Power, and sharing the hosting duties throughout the course of the day. So thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Are you in Atlanta right now?
I'm in Atlanta, yes.
Okay, so Dr. Merritt is an independent scholar, a historian, a filmmaker, author of a book on race, slavery in the Antebellum South, a co-editor of another book on labor and race in the South. And we're really pleased to have you. You have your PhD from the University of Georgia. And my understanding is you do live and work in Atlanta. And so what would you like to talk about today?
So as you said, I'm in Atlanta. I'm going to talk a little bit about censorship and education in the Antebellum South, but I do want to put it in a little wider context, bringing in the topics that you were just discussing. You know, I'm in Georgia, so these laws, these authoritarian laws, and let's get into a little bit of that, what that means. They're coming through to every single southern state. They're coming into Georgia right now. They're eventually going to go through the Midwest and even try some of the western states, the non-coastal western states. So this is not just a Florida problem. And this kind of awareness of what we're up against, what we're facing at a state level, with every single state that has a red legislature is going to be passing versions of these laws very, very soon, if they're not already.
Okay, well, not terrific, but terrific that you're going to cover this content. And I'm going to go off screen for about 10 to 12 minutes, and then I'm going to come back as you got about a 15-minute window here, and then a little Q&A after.
Great, thank you.
Yep, thank you so much.
So, as I was saying, a little bit about me. I study interracial cooperation, organizing, resistance. My first book was on poor whites in the slave South. So people that did not own slaves or land or own land. And I really looked at how slavery impacted their lives and showed that even though their lives were in no way comparable to the brutality and generations of rape and unpaid labor that Black people went through in this country, that there were real tangible ways that slavery actually hurt white people in the South as well, these poor white people. And a main way that it hurt them was through education and censorship. And as many of you probably know, as soon as slavery began being codified in the United States, states started passing laws where not only enslaved people, but free Blacks were not allowed to learn how to read or write. And as we enter into the antebellum period, these laws become even stronger and even more punitive, particularly on the back of Nat Turner's rebellion, because Nat Turner was a literate man. He knew how to read. And of course, enslavers knew that this was a key for Black people to be able to organize and to resist and to really try to throw off, the powers that be. And so what I wanted to really talk about was the fact that even in cases where it seems like African-American history is being targeted and minority history is being targeted and LGBTQ history is being targeted, this affects every American, and it will affect every American. And so I want to start out with a little quote by an abolitionist named Henry Ward Beecher. And he said, in the South, and this is during the antebellum period, ignorance is an institution. They legislate for ignorance the same way we legislate for schoolhouses. To protect and preserve slavery, enslavers understood that preventing education among poor whites while simultaneously attempting to keep the enslaved completely illiterate helped to stifle the spread of abolitionist ideas. Illiterate or semi-literate, the white masses remained largely uninformed and politically apathetic. Slaveholders realized that allowing non-slaveholders access to information would disrupt their own fortunes and thus impose a strict system of censorship throughout the region. And so this kind of censorship, I just want to be clear, ended in punitive laws for whites who were found with any kind of abolitionist literature, any kind of even Republican literature, once the Republican Party started in 1856. And if they were caught with a paper, with a magazine, with a book, they were liable to be imprisoned for years at a time. If they were caught a second time, not only could they be beaten, but they could be lynched in many states. And as slaveholders realized that we were inching closer and closer to civil war, these laws became even more punitive as they were trying to make sure there was not an alliance between the underclasses of the South, the poor whites, and the enslaved and free blacks. And so they really, not only were they banning books and censoring things that came into the region, they were going through the mails. This is like Nazi Germany. This is like Stalinist Russia. They are going through every piece of mail that comes into the South, making sure there's nothing that talks about slavery or talks about how bad life is for poor whites in the South as compared to working class whites in the North. And so basically what happens is, because of the censorship, enslavers don't fund education throughout the South, and the South lags behind the entire rest of the nation in education, even for white people. And even to this day, we are still behind the rest of the nation, the Deep South, the Cotton South, where slavery was at its highest rates. We are the states that rank the lowest in terms of education every single year, even today. And by keeping the overwhelming majority of poor whites during the antebellum period uneducated and illiterate, basically, these enslavers were able to control their lives. They were able to control access for information. They were able to control the fact that they weren't really allowed to vote. They kept them disenfranchised by not having knowledge of what was going on in the country, of what was going on, at a larger level. And this kind of reinforced, of course, a cycle of poverty and kept the poorest white people poor and trapped in this cycle of poverty, of illiteracy. They could never get out. These are people that can't sign their names to a contract, right? That can't sign their names, even when they're being booked into jails. They're using their mark. They're using an X. Probably a very interesting fact that most Americans don't realize is that the way that public education ends up coming to the South in any sort of real way for white people is through the Freedmen's Bureau and through Black education, right? Black education is what brings full public education into the South. And so the Freedmen's Bureau comes in and starts creating schools during and after the Civil War. And these schools not only served Black people, newly freed Black people, but white people as well, poor white people who had never had access to school, to non-paid schools. And again, I think it's a very important thing to realize that during Reconstruction, not only were politics and politicians really targeted, but teachers were targeted. Schoolhouses were the first things burned, not only churches, but schoolhouses, because again, the powers, the elite whites in this country understand that by keeping people uneducated and illiterate, and by banning things and censoring things that they don't want people to know, that they can keep a complete power hold, a complete stranglehold of information, and keep people in cycles of poverty, keep people basically powerless, politically powerless to do anything. Now, I don't want this to be a complete downer, because I think the other flip side of this is that throughout history, not only during Reconstruction, but again in civil rights, again in the 1890s with populism, there is this incredible resistance and pushback against these powers that are banning books, these powers that are censoring knowledge in this nation. And I've been doing a lot of interviews with former SNCC members recently, and I think a really good model to look at is the freedom schools that they had in Mississippi in the 1960s as a part of the civil rights movement, and realizing that not only was there a part of that was a push to educate people on how to vote, how to use the bureaucratic process, how to register to vote and get out there and actually vote. But the other flip side was actually educating people on the system and educating people on the racism in this country and the colonialism in this country and the imperialism in this country and how we have gotten to where we are today because our history is so important and how we decide to fight back against it. And there are some real lessons if we go back and look at the leaders of Reconstruction, the leaders of the civil rights movement. And I know my time is supposed to end about now, so this is a very quick presentation, but I wanted to end also with a quote by Henry Ward Beecher that says, "Knowledge is not only power in the South, but also powder, liable to blow false institutions to atoms." And I think that's really important to remember these days, is that we have the ability, we have national networks, support networks that we can dial into and help people in these states, in these red legislature states that are passing these laws, and really make this more of a national fight. But the key, of course, to all of that is organizing. And so I'm looking forward to hearing all the different ideas here about how we organize and how we band together to resist these kind of really authoritarian laws.
Thank you very much for that. When you've been talking to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee folks, what's a few of the high level strategies or takeaways that you've heard from them about the freedom schools?
So they had a complete reading list, and they really did. During the summers, they set up actual schools in almost every county that they could and had them led by local people and gave them, they had the authors actually donate books, which I know one of my publishers, Haymarket, is doing right now. If you live in Florida and you want access to some of these banned books, you can go to Haymarket's website right now, and they will send them to you for free. And so SNCC used plans like that. They also were very conscious about teaching people how to organize. And again, I think that's the key to this, is that you talk to these SNCC members in their mid 80s right now, and it's so horrible, but they're seeing the government kind of go through another phase that they hopefully thought they would never see post-civil rights movement, right? And they don't have a lot of faith in government, many of them anymore. And so they really are looking at ways outside of the government to handle these problems. And the key to that is grassroots organizing at a local level, really turning in towards your community, turning in towards your neighborhood, figuring out, if you can't take on the bigger powers that be, what can you do today? What can you do for a neighbor? What can you do for a friend in need? And really focusing on local community.
We've been fortunate at Common Power to spend some time with Bob Zellner of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And, it has been our experience through his contacts and our own reading and seeing all SNCC veterans, is that these folks may have walked away from SNCC because SNCC implodes in 1966 and 1967, but they have not walked at all away from their kind of profound belief in the beloved community and a sense of justice and a life of commitment to a better democracy and world. And the freedom schools are exactly a model that the Institute for Common Power has sought to build upon outside of traditional educational spaces, a recognition that we're going to maybe need to work outside of those spaces significantly in the years to come, and to take it as a challenge and not to take it as a moment of despair or or like impossibility. In your own work, when you look at censorship in the antebellum era, and I think about the gag order and this, in the Congress, you can't talk about slavery for a period of time. And what's a takeaway that you bring forward from that work, maybe merged with SNCC, maybe not merged with the SNCC work, about how you intend to work? I see you're an independent scholar. Okay. And so it seems like you're set up to work outside of the traditional educational environments.
I am incredibly lucky enough to be able to do that, because honestly, everything I have written up to this date, everything I have on slate to write in the future is and will be banned. The latest book that I edited with Uhuru Williams, actually, one of our authors is Robin D.G. Kelly in that book, who was on the AP list of banned scholars. So, I mean, this hits home, but my push as a white person in this fight is to really try to alert other white people that even if they think that this is not applicable to them because it tends to be focused on African American history or LGBTQ history, even if it even just stays on those two main topics, it is still going to affect them. It is still going to affect their children. It is still going to affect their freedoms in this country. And so they better take it seriously, and they better get out there and fight with their brethren in this country.
And I have a last question for you here about your own professional journey. Your books have received a lot of awards. Congratulations, and those don't come lightly.
Thank you.
They're also, yeah, absolutely, and also you don't tend to get those awards unless you are employed by an academic institution, because there's an internal process with who gets nominated, who gets considered for these kinds of awards. Has it been an intentional choice on your part to not pursue a traditional academic route, or is it been more of it kind of just unfolded this way?
Well, so when I came on the job market, this was a crisis of jobs in history, of course. And I was in a lot of ways bound to Atlanta, but to make this very personal, and I don't usually bring this up, but I have a Black son, and a lot of the schools I was going to get hired at, I was not going to take my Black son and live in those areas. And I think that's something that we don't talk about enough as academics, is the fact that there are a lot of people that end up dropping out of teaching in areas that probably really need it because of personal safety, or because they're not willing to put their children through living in certain areas. And unfortunately, again, as these laws proliferate, as these laws, especially even with transgender children, continue to happen, this is it's going to be a huge crisis.
Yeah, and it's intersectional, deeply intersectional. The laws that Florida and others are pursuing certainly are racialized, but they're also gendered and sexualized in all kinds of ways. And the attack on trans individuals is just appalling today.
Right. We are descending quickly, and so I'm so grateful that organizations like this are actually taking action and doing something, because I feel like for far too long we've been just letting this slide.
Thank you so much for your time and for your work. And if you're good, and obviously you are close colleagues with Dr. Williams, and Dr. Williams and us at Institute for Common Power have been really getting to know each other and working closely together. So I'm sure we're going to cross paths again, and I'll look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And he's one of my favorite people on the planet. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Merritt.